Welcome to End Times Examined. This is part 4 in our series titled Bible Prophecy and the New World Order, Rise of Antichrist Kingdom. In part 1, we took a look at Bible prophecy and what it is and its significance. Part 2, we began examination of the one world government described in Revelation 13 and also took a brief look at the United Nations. Part 3, we did a breakdown of the European Union and the imagery surrounding it and how it ties into prophecy. If you haven't yet seen these videos, once again I encourage you to do so. Each part in this series is a standalone work, so it's okay if you're seeing this video first. You can always go back later and check out the others. And like I said in part 1, this is a presentation I did for a church in the Philippines. Here I'm just slicing it into smaller bites. Otherwise, this would probably be a 6-hour-long video. Okay, so let's take a look at the Council on Foreign Relations. The Council on Foreign Relations, also known by the acronym CFR, is an organization comprised of influential and famous individuals from various sectors of American society. The members are all from the U.S., and the aim of this group is to influence or steer United States foreign policy for the advancement of certain objectives. And these objectives determine what the United States' role is and how it will cooperate in bringing about global governance. Here is the CFR's logo. Now, if you've ever seen the painting of Napoleon, his portrait of him riding the white horse, then you can see this crude drawing kind of resembles it. Now there is a word below the man on horseback which is written in Latin. The word is U.B.I.K, and it literally means everywhere. This is where we get the English word ubiquitous, which means to be present everywhere. And a synonym for ubiquitous is omnipresent. Being omnipresent is one of the primary attributes ascribed to the God of the Bible, along with omniscience, or all-knowing, and omnipotent, or all-powerful. Is the CFR's goal to literally be everywhere, as their logo states? Let's take a look at who's a part of the CFR and what work they're involved in. On their very own website it states, the David Rockefeller Studies Program, CFR's think tank. If you've watched part 2 of this series, then you know the Rockefeller family has been involved in globalist causes for quite some time now. David Rockefeller flat out admitted it in his own biography memoirs. Then it's not surprising that David Rockefeller was a chairman of the CFR during his lifetime. And such is his influence that we have the David Rockefeller Studies Program described as the CFR's think tank, or you could say brainstorming platform. But that's not all. On their website, once again, we find this statement. The studies program is organized into more than a dozen program areas and centers, including the International Institutions and Global Governance Program. It's obvious they're not hiding what they're doing. They are actively and unashamedly involved in bringing about global governance, just like the quotes we've seen from David Rockefeller and Walter Cronkite in parts 2 and 3 of this series. So here is James Paul Warburg. He was a financial advisor to U.S. President Franklin D. Roosevelt. This is from Wikipedia. Warburg was a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. He gained some notice in a February 17, 1950 appearance before the U.S. Senate Committee on Foreign Relations, in which he said, "We shall have world government, whether or not we like it. The question is only whether world government will be achieved by consent or by conquest." Here's a quote from former U.S. Navy Judge Advocate General Admiral Chester Ward, who was himself a longtime CFR member. Quote, CFR as such does not write the platforms of both political parties or select their respective presidential candidates, or control U.S. defense and foreign policies. But CFR members, as individuals, acting in concert with other individual CFR members, do. Once the ruling members of the CFR have decided that the U.S. government should adopt a particular policy, the very substantial research facilities of CFR are put to work to develop arguments, intellectual and emotional, to support the new policy and to confound and discredit, intellectually and politically, any opposition. And don't we see that played out in the American media and politics all the time? Now here's another quote on the CFR by researcher Kathy Burns. The CFR, originally financed by the Rockefeller Foundation, is comprised of the most elite names in the government, the military, labor, business, finance, the media, the foundations, and the academies, and is the most influential semi-public organization in the United States in the field of foreign policy. Internationalist in viewpoint, CFR members believe national boundaries should be obliterated and one world rule established. Their goal is simply to abolish the United States with its constitutional guarantees of liberty, and they don't even try to hide it. And we saw just that from their own website, how they don't hide their globalist ambitions. So let's take a look at the CFR's member roster, again from their own website. Now I have it listed as current CFR membership. This was accurate as of 2 years ago when I first compiled this list. I'm sharing this with you just to let you know it may be slightly different now as of the making of this video in July of 2019. However, it still gives you a good idea of the type of individuals who are allowed in this organization. Let's look at the names listed here, and I'll just read them off one by one. Bill Clinton, the 42nd U.S. President. Madeleine Albright, Bill Clinton's Secretary of State. Chelsea Clinton, daughter of Bill Clinton. George Clooney, the famous actor. John McCain, U.S. Senator from Arizona. Olympia J. Snowe, U.S. Senator from Maine. George Soros, the leftist Marxist billionaire. Brian Williams, the habitual lying and disgraced American journalist who somehow still has a job in media, maybe due to his CFR membership. Dick Cheney, Vice President under George W. Bush. John Bolton, former U.S. Ambassador to the UN. Lynn Forrester de Rothschild, CEO of E.L. Rothschild. This is the famous Rothschild family from Europe, which we will be examining later in our section on the one world economy. Keith Ellison, U.S. Representative from Minnesota. Henry M. Paulson, former U.S. Treasury Secretary. David H. Petraeus, retired U.S. Army General and former CIA Director. Janet Napolitano, former Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security under President Obama. David Rockefeller, who is now deceased, and along with 3 other Rockefellers, John D. Rockefeller, Mark L. Rockefeller, Stephen C. Rockefeller. So no surprise there. Jesse Jackson, civil rights activist. George Stephanopoulos, Clinton senior advisor. Paul Tagliabue, former NFL commissioner. Now when I first saw this, I thought, this doesn't make sense. But then again, it kind of does, given all the shenanigans we've seen with the NFL over the past few years now with the anthem and protests. Richard D. Land, president of the Southern Evangelical Seminary in Charlotte, North Carolina. He's also the former president of the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission, ERLC, which is the public policy arm of the Southern Baptist Convention, a post he held from 1988 to 2013. Question: is the SBC helping direct CFR policy, or is the CFR steering SBC policy? That's worth investigating. And speaking of investigating, here's Bob Schieffer, CBS journalist. Next is Stanley McChrystal, retired U.S. Army General. Adam Silver, current NBA Commissioner. David Stern, former NBA Commissioner. So what does professional sports have to do with globalism other than, say, marketing it to other parts of the world? It's all just entertainment and making money, right? Or are they using the influence of sports as another means of conditioning us to accept their globalist agenda? Something to think about the next time you sit down to watch a game. Barbara Walters, the famous journalist and former host of the unwatchably bad show The View. That's obviously my opinion. Maybe yours too. Condoleezza Rice, former Secretary of State under President George W. Bush. Paul Volcker, former Chairman of the U.S. Federal Reserve. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, U.S. Supreme Court Judge. Alan Greenspan, former Federal Reserve. Angelina Jolie, you may have heard of her. Michael Bloomberg, former New York City Mayor. Andrea Mitchell, famous American journalist. I'm thinking NBC, but I'm not for sure. Diane Sawyer, another famous American journalist. Sanjay Gupta, American neurosurgeon and media reporter. Strobe Talbot, former Deputy Secretary of State. Dan Rather, another disgraced lying journalist as well as former CBS News anchor. And last, but certainly not least, Henry Kissinger, former Secretary of State under President Nixon. Keep in mind, this is my own short list of members compiled from their website. Many more names can be found, but I stuck with the most famous or prominent, at least in the public eye. So now that we have a basic idea of what the Council on Foreign Relations is and who comprises it, the next organization we're going to look at is the Trilateral Commission. So just like we did with the CFR, let's see what the Trilateral Commission is all about from their own statement on their own website. So here it is. Current project work is focused on addressing the challenges of globalization. I'm sensing a common theme here. Here is Zbigniew Brzezinski. He co-founded the Trilateral Commission with David Rockefeller and was its director from 1973 to 1976. Let's get his opinion on national sovereignty. You know, the idea that nations, like the United States, Britain, Canada, any nation, should have the right to govern themselves. In his book, Between Two Ages, America's Role in the Technotronic Era, Brzezinski declared, "National sovereignty is no longer a viable concept." What would this look like? Well, for one, open borders everywhere, with a centralized governing body like the United Nations. We have a handful of members listed, and you will see some familiar names as they are also CFR members. There's a lot of commonality and crossover between these two groups. What differentiates these two groups is that while the CFR is made up only of U.S. members, the Trilateral Commission is made up of members from North America, Western Europe, and originally Japan, but since the year 2000 also includes members of other Asian Pacific nations. So for my Filipino brothers and sisters in the Lord, I shared a few prominent, although unknown to me, names in the Philippine business world. The last name on this list intrigued me not because he's a Filipino, but that he was a former Deputy Managing Director for the International Monetary Fund, an organization we will see in our section on the One World Economy. Recent developments, especially the devastating economic crisis, have highlighted the world's growing interdependence and drawn attention to the need to reform the structures of global governance. That's the quote. Now let's go back and look at the title of this document. Seeking Opportunities in Crisis. Trilateral Cooperation in Meeting Global Challenges. If you remember from part 2 in our video clip of the New World Order quotes, you may have seen an elderly man say something about the current crisis being a great opportunity to create a new world order. But in case you missed it, here it is again.
Around the world. I think his task will be to develop an overall strategy for America in this period when really a new world order can be created. It's a great opportunity. It isn't just a crisis.
That man is Henry Kissinger. We've seen his name on the membership list of both the CFR and Trilateral Commission. You can also see his name highlighted in red here as one of the authors of this document. So let's take a brief moment to check out some quotes of his. He is the author of an online article titled, "The World Must Forge a New Order or Retreat to Chaos." Here's a small sample of quotes I pulled from his article. "The American prescription for a world financial order has generally been unchallenged. Any international order will emerge if a system of compatible priorities comes into being. The alternative to a new international order is chaos. The extraordinary impact of the president-elect," and here he's speaking of Barack Obama, "on the imagination of humanity is an important element in shaping a new world order. An international order can be permanent only if its participants have a share not only in building, but also in securing it." Okay, let's touch on a few more influential groups. This is Club Bilderberg, commonly called the Bilderberg Group. This is another globalist group that hold their meetings once every year. The members are made up of many of the same people we've already seen, and also of other international persons of power and influence. No surprise that David Rockefeller's name appears again, as he was named on the advisory group for the steering committee. Here's the Club of Rome. Once again, lots of member crossover with the previous groups. And once again, we turn to their own words to see what they're up to. The book, The Limits to Growth, which is a Club of Rome document, contains a message of hope as well. Man can create a society in which he can live indefinitely on earth if he imposes limits on himself and his production of material goods to achieve a state of global equilibrium with population and production in carefully selected balance. This statement brings to my mind the Georgia Guidestones, which have been called the Ten Commandments of the New World Order. The very first guideline listed states, "Maintain humanity under 500 million in perpetual balance with nature." There are currently 7.5 billion people on planet Earth. And this leads us into another Club of Rome report titled, "The Common Enemy of Humanity is Man." In searching for a common enemy against whom we can unite, we came up with the idea. In other words, they fabricated it. They made it up. That pollution, the threat of global warming, water shortages, famine, and the like would fit the bill. All these dangers are caused by human intervention in natural processes, and it is only through changed attitudes and behavior that they can be overcome. The real enemy, then, is humanity itself. Last organization we'll examine is the Fabian Society. This group is based in the UK and is comprised of some famous individuals. They have two different logos. The older one is on the left and the current logo to the right. It should be quite obvious that their original logo is an image of a wolf in sheep's clothing. And Jesus told us in Matthew 7 verse 15 to "Beware of false prophets which come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ravening wolves." And in verse 16 he tells us we shall know them by their fruits or by the works which they do. So what is the work of the Fabian Society? To understand it, let's look at the other logo they use, this one being the tortoise. And there's a phrase underneath it. I know the writing is a little blurred, but it says, "When I strike hard." To the Fabian Society, this refers to their promotion of socialism through evolution, not revolution. Unlike the communist dictatorships of China, Russia, Cuba, and others, which brought about socialism by use of force, the Fabians support socialism in a very gradual, methodical approach, slowly infiltrating governments and indoctrinating the public to accept socialist tenets. Yes, the Fabian Society is socialist to the core. To illustrate this point, we will quote one of their most famous members, the Irish playwright George Bernard Shaw. Quoting from his Intelligent Women's Guide to Socialism and Capitalism, we read, Under socialism, you would not be allowed to be poor. You would be forcibly fed, clothed, lodged, taught, and employed whether you liked it or not. If it were discovered you had not the character and industry enough to be worth all this trouble, you might possibly be executed in a kindly manner. Executed in a kindly manner. At least it mirrors the same compassion for mankind that was the standard of communist Russia and China. Here is H.G. Wells, the writer known as the father of science fiction. He was another well-known Fabian socialist. Tony Blair, former Prime Minister of Great Britain, is yet another. He is a promoter of the movement called the Third Way. This is a position which seeks the reconciliation of left and right-wing politics to a more centrist position. If you watched our last video, you understand this to be the Hegelian dialectic. Thesis versus antithesis producing synthesis, a converging compromise of the two. This is socialism through evolution at work. The last Fabian socialist we will look at is Annie Besant, who was a British socialist, activist, and theosophist. She was at one time president of the Theosophical Society, which was founded by a woman named H.P. Blavatsky. We'll look at the Theosophical Society, and in particular H.P. Blavatsky in more detail later in our series, but in short, it is a society steeped in occult New Age philosophy. And yes, this is their official logo, and you can see it contains an eclectic mix of occult and religious symbols. The Theosophical Society has influenced the likes of Adolf Hitler and Elvis Presley, just to name a few. I'd almost bet you never heard those two names together in a sentence. So we're going to bring this video to a close with a couple of quotes from Annie Besant. No philosophy, no religion has ever brought so glad a message to the world as this good news of atheism. This Old Testament containing error, folly, absurdity, and immorality is a blasphemy. If there were anyone to be blasphemed, blacker and more insolent than any word ever written or penned by the most hot-headed freethinker. But we can turn this entire statement on its head and say no. The only blasphemy being committed here is by all these organizations which are striving to gain power and control over the world and its people by deception and manipulation. God wants to gain power and control over your life so that you can have a relationship and fellowship with Him. Satan is using the individuals involved in the CFR, Trilateral Commission, and other like groups to bring humanity under bondage. But you can have true freedom through Jesus Christ and the debt He paid on the cross for your sins, taking your rightful place as a son or daughter in His kingdom, which will once and for all put away all this chaos and foolishness. Regardless of what these satanically inspired organizations do, we have no reason to fear if we are in Christ. For God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power, of love, and of a sound mind. Our next video will feature the group whose name has become more mainstream in pop culture, but is often ridiculed when people, like myself, use the term in exposing the New World Order. So bring your tinfoil hat as we look at the meaning and symbolism of the Illuminati. Until next time, thanks for watching and keep examining.